Hey everyone, welcome to What About Grief? I'm Larry Holm. One of the things we've talked about here on the podcast is how each person's grief journey is different. But there's one thing we all have in common. We are the recipients of an endless stream of suggestions and opinions from those around us who don't hesitate to share their well-meant advice, ask the dreaded question, "How are you?" or assume that we've reached some endpoint on the timeline for our grief. But I'm here to tell you that grief does not have a finish line. Just moments in life when it is under control and moments in life when it takes over. And you try everything possible to get it out of your mind. I'll give you an example. It's been a little over 4 years since my wife Sarah passed away. And the other night I was flying home from Hartford to Chicago. I was reading a book today's guest wrote, and my emotions just took over. I could relate to almost every word, feeling, and experience she was dealing with. My eyes began to water, and it just put me in a grief funk. It also didn't help that once we landed at O'Hare, we sat on the plane for 90 minutes waiting for a gate to open. I was about to explode with all these emotions swirling in my head. All I'm saying is, grief is always around the corner, even if you think you have it beat. It's taken me a long time to understand that it will always be there. This month's guest, writer Ann Hood, wrote about her own grief in the early period after the death of her 5-year-old daughter, Grace, and it really struck me in a visceral way. She writes, "Grief is not linear. One day you are acting almost like a normal person, then a song, a glimpse of something, or maybe even nothing sends you back into the hole of grief. It is not one step forward, 2 steps back. It is a jumble." That perfectly describes what I've been calling on this podcast, the grief ambush. Actually, so much of what Ann wrote in her memoir, Comfort, A Journey Through Grief, resonated with me. And I'm really happy she could join me and my producer, Marcia, today. Ann Hood is a New York Times bestselling author of novels, short stories, memoirs, and nonfiction. And she also teaches at both the New School and New York University. So, Ann, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. That was a beautiful, beautiful introduction, Larry.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to have you, and your books have helped me so much. And so let's dive into A Journey Through Grief a little bit here.
Okay.
When I read the prologue from your book, Comfort, A Journey Through Grief, I had this vivid image in my mind of you sitting in a chair on a stage in a pitch black auditorium with a bright spotlight highlighting you, and all of these people kind of behind you whispering in your ear what you should be doing now to move on from the passing of your daughter, Grace. And I'm just kind of curious right off the bat, am I far off in that visual description?
I love that visual. Maybe we have a theater piece in
There
our
you go.
future.
Yeah, let's go.
The only difference, and Larry, I'm sure you experienced this too, is they weren't always whispering. People were very bossy about it. I thought.
Yes.
You know, they were. They felt they had a right to tell you what you should be doing, what you should be feeling. In fact, I remember specifically being at a dinner with a man whose wife had died, and he had remarried. It had been maybe 10 years. And this was just a few months after Grace died. And he said with great sort of, wisdom, like the sage speaking from on high, "I certainly hope you've gotten rid of all of her things."
Oh.
And I couldn't believe the audacity of this man who didn't know me, really, to tell me that I should have thrown away or given away my daughter's things just a few months after she had died. Those objects, that clothing, so much of it was at first very painful. And then it became almost a source of comfort just to have those things. But, I just feel like it was more that kind of tone than someone gently saying things.
Yeah. It's so relatable because everyone has an opinion on your life, right? And then once they kind of voice their opinion, they quickly jump back into their lives and they kind of just leave you there. And you and I are still trying to breathe and picking up the pieces of our shattered life. And And doing your best just to kind of get through that day, and then someone has something always to say, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, first off, tell us about your daughter, Grace. What kind of paint a picture of her for our listeners?
It's so interesting. I hadn't realized this when we set this date, but as it happens, her birthday was 2 days ago. And so I always take that day. I kind of, take a mental health day, a broken heart day. And I spend a lot of that time thinking about her because, she was only 5. And a 5-year-old, even though she was a very big personality, that's only 5 years. Unlike when I pause to think about my mom or my dad who have died, there's, decades of memories and pictures and all of that. And I actually realized that I have a limited amount of pictures of her still, and I'll never have more. But she was, and so I wrote a social media post because people were reaching out to me, wonderful friends and family members. And I wanted to sort of distill who she was. 5 years old, she loved the Beatles. She loved the Beatles so much, and her favorite Beatle was George. And which says a lot to me because I was that shallow kid who, of course, loved Paul McCartney. And to think that my daughter saw the wisdom in like George Harrison, I think it says a lot about her. She carried around with her in a little bag, always a thing of hard salami and a book of Charles Addams cartoons. So she was a very quirky kid. Yeah, very quirky. Very funny. She had a very deep, raspy voice, and she wore glasses from the time she was a year and a half old.
And she was proud of them, right? When I read the book, she was so proud of them.
She loved them. Yeah. She loved her glasses. And she loved to dress herself, and she loved wearing like pink with orange and, flowers with stripes. And so she always had on crazy mismatched clothes. And she was also very messy. And so her tights were always ripped. And she loved to paint and draw. So she always had paint in her fingernails and glitter in her hair. And she was just a glorious mess.
I think big personality is a perfect way to describe her, because when I was reading your book, I mean, she packed in more in a day, it seemed like, than most of us do. And everybody knew her. And, she was like in control when she walked into a room.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
So can you kind of describe what happened to Grace when she was only 5 years old?
Yeah, so I'll kind of say up front that what she died of was a very virulent form of strep. The same form of strep that Jim Henson, the Muppet guy, died from. It's sometimes called galloping strep because often by the time it's diagnosed, it's too late to do anything about it, which is exactly what happened with Grace. It is the same form of strep that causes strep throat. And it's very interesting that after she died, and as I started writing about it, I've heard from so many parents whose child died of this. And if there's anything that we were lucky about, it was that we knew something was wrong and we got her to an ER. Often with this form of strep, the child just goes to take a nap, it doesn't wake up. It's that strong. And so, she got a fever. And I'll always remember the pediatrician who told me, take her to the ER instead of bring her to the office. She later said to me, there was something in your voice, and a mother always knows when something's very wrong.
Yeah.
And she was she was kind of like a wet noodle, like cooked spaghetti. She couldn't hold herself up. And so in a strange turn of events, that same day, one of our cars had been stolen. And so my ex-husband, but then my husband and my son were off at the police station. And I'm zipping to the ER. And the ER doctor was very calm. And he said, strep's going around, but never thinking it could be bad strep.
Right.
And she had a febrile seizure. So they put her in for observation, but said it's just overnight. And a friend of ours who was a doctor heard she was in the hospital. So he stopped by to check on her, even though he's an orthopedic surgeon, not a pediatrician. And he took one look at her and he burst into tears. And he ran and he got people from the ICU to come. he just saw that she was gravely ill.
Yeah.
And she was in the ICU for 36 hours, and they worked, diligent doesn't even describe it, on that poor little girl. But, and at one point they'd even said she's going to make it. And I ran into the into the waiting room where all of my family was and said she's going to make it. And they were jubilant. But about 2 hours later, she died.
Wow. I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
How did you cope at first after Grace had passed away in the early days, after that?
Not well.
Yeah.
I don't think I did cope. I think one thing really saved me and helped me, which is that I had another child. My son, Sam, was 8. And I had lost my brother, my only sibling. And I remembered feeling like for a period of time, I lost my mother too, because she was so bereft. And so I made a decision. I mean, that first day, Sam wasn't going to feel like that, because that had been a terrible time for me. And so I was somehow, of course, the first couple of days, you're surrounded by people, you're making decisions, you're in shock. So that's a blur. But I pretty quickly was taking him to school, packing him his lunch, picking him up, doing his homework, taking him to his after-school stuff. But in between all of that, I was just a hot mess.
Yeah. You wrote about the first time you were going to cook pasta again. And
yeah.
I want to just read that because I totally can relate to this. You said, the process that had once been automatic had turned complicated. Get a pan, I told myself. Fill it with water. I had not done even these simple things in almost 3 months. Yeah. And, for me, it's so simple. We do this every day, but it was a major achievement for me to go pick up my mail. But,
yes.
I wouldn't even open it. I would just put it on my kitchen island, and maybe a few days later then have the strength or whatever to open up a piece of mail. And for you, cooking pasta, okay, I have to get water and turn on the stove. Just everyday
I couldn't handle
things.
this. Right. I can't handle those simple steps.
Yeah.
I remember actually very specifically that pasta because for months, people fed us.
Right.
My mom was still alive, of course, so she was feeding us, and I had a lot of family around me and friends. And of course, I didn't know that, but I was on one of those meal things that people are setting up, and helping us. And a very well-meaning person who I didn't know that well was going to send, bring dinner, and everybody else had done these casseroles. I still remember enchiladas, and how to heat them up, and frozen, and everybody was so thorough. And she left a bag with the pasta and Parmesan cheese. And I thought, well, what the heck am I supposed to do with this? You're supposed to be feeding me.
Right, exactly.
And that was the pasta that I struggled to make. But I will say, and I do write about this in the book, I don't know how much time had gone by. Someone left a Le Creuset pot of this veal stew that I dutifully only had to heat up.
Yeah.
And I remember putting it on the table, and we all took a bite and looked at each other and said, this is terrible. This is bad food. And that was a turning point for me because it was the first time I remember tasting food. Unfortunately, it was bad. But
right.
I still remember that. I'm sort of grateful to that person because it sort of said, well, I can do better than this,
right.
And
yeah, get back on the horse. Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you describe how losing Grace might have affected your writing?
Well, initially it really affected it because I couldn't do it. I started writing stories when I was quite little, 7, 8 years old. And I started writing them because I realized that when I wrote something down or made something up, it helped me understand something about the world I was living in, about my grandmother who I didn't get along with, or, a kid in school who had upset me. So pretty early on, writing became a really important part of who I was and how I saw the world and interpreted the world. And the second thing was that reading helped me escape. I could sit down with a book and everything went away. And believe me, I had a very happy, normal childhood, but just with the typical kid stuff, And after Grace died, both of those things were taken from me. I could not focus enough to read a book or to read anything. I mean, I remember people bringing me like People magazine and I couldn't make sense of it. Well, maybe you can't make sense of it. And more importantly, I guess I couldn't write. People kept urging me to write about it. I can't tell you how many journals I got as gifts. People would leave journals and pens and implore me to write things down. Just take notes. Don't try to write it as a story. Just write. And I couldn't. I realized, of course, with hindsight, that I was in shock for probably a year or more. I could not believe what had happened.
Yeah.
Sometimes I still can't, and I'm sure you relate to that, Larry.
Sure.
You kind of look around and go, what the heck happened?
How did I get here? Yeah.
How did I get here? And it took me, reading came back to me after about a year. And I once again could lose myself in books. Writing took much longer. I guess partially it was, yes, shock and an inability to focus. But I think too, as a writer, you write to kind of make sense of the chaos of the world, to understand these emotions that we have. And there was no understanding what had happened, and I couldn't make sense of it. So I think it was a natural inclination to not try to write about it because I couldn't do what writing does.
But your writing allows us to jump into your mind and understand and live day to day with what you were going through. And I so appreciate that because that's how I so connected with you on so many items that you wrote about.
Thank you.
My question would be, it's as someone who dove into this podcast game with Larry, it was in place of a lasagna, or it was like, okay, I know how to do this. I can help. I guess, do you have memories of good advice or anything that people did that did bring some kind of comfort?
Oh, so many things, so many endless things. I had a friend who would just let herself in. We had 3 doors, like a back door, a front door, and a side door. She would let herself in the side door and just slip into the basement and do our laundry every week.
Yeah.
Because, you can be grieving and you still have dirty socks.
Right.
And it was such an act of kindness for those folded clothes to just appear. Clean and folded clothes. I always say to people who ask what to do, I say, do something simple and do something extraordinary. I had really an acquaintance, I can't even say she was a close friend, who every week for about 2 years just sent me a card. Sometimes the card itself had a message. Sometimes she just wrote, thinking of you, thinking of Grace. But every week, and I mean, that took some thought on her part.
Sure.
To get, write that card and mail that card. And then I had friends who did, extraordinary things like drive from New York City 4.5 hours, just have lunch with me, to help me, to make sure I was okay. My midwife who had delivered my kids came and sat down and made my mammogram appointment and my pap smear appointment. She's like, these are the things people forget to do. And you still have to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
So those are all things that just people thinking, seeing what you needed and not asking you, but just stepping up and doing it.
I'm going to take Marcia off the producing of the podcast and give her a new assignment of laundry.
Laundry?
Yeah. She's lucky I'm pretty OCD. And actually, cleaning was my therapy because I love to clean and vacuum and all that. And Sarah would, after a month of our marriage, she's like, I don't feel guilty not cleaning because you like to clean. That's your therapy.
Wow.
And that's how I kind of got through it all too. It took my mind off of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But tell us about knitting because you weren't a knitter, but man, somebody suggested knitting to you. So explain that whole thing.
I have to say, not only was I not a knitter, I was like the opposite of a knitter. I don't know what that is, but I stayed away from any kind of crafty thing, even things like, I don't know, collage, doing collage with magazine things. I tried to do that once when I was a teenager, and I set my mother's rug on fire. Like I just am not good at stuff like that, And the only class I think in my entire life I didn't get an A in was home economics. I'm old enough to have to take it.
Yeah.
And we had to, half of it was sewing. And I mean, I could not make that darn skirt. I could not make it. I had to, we had to wear them to school on like a particular day when we all finished. I couldn't go to school that day because I did not have a skirt. Like I couldn't do anything like that. But friends would come every day, and I would say I was like a golden retriever. They'd walk and water me. And then on one of those walks, my two friends who are both visual artists said, it was about 6 months after Grace died. They said, we think you have to find something to get yourself out of your head because you're just a person who lives in their head. And it's not helping you at all. So I said, okay, what do I do? And I remember the first one said, you could reupholster your sofa. And I thought, I don't see that happening. And I don't see that helping me.
Yeah. That doesn't even sound like fun when we're not grieving.
I was like, people do that?
Yeah.
I don't think so. But then they both kind of said, you should learn to knit. And I remember going back home from that walk and opening the Yellow Pages. Yes, it was that long ago.
Yeah.
And looking up knitting stores. And I was living in Rhode Island. So there weren't a million, there were like 6 or 8 or 10. And I called everyone, and they had each started their beginning classes in September. And here it was the beginning of October. And I remember hanging up after calling the last one and saying, I'm trying to help myself here. I need help helping myself. Like, come on, people, And very shortly thereafter, I was picking my son up at school, and it had one of those, sadistic systems of being in a circle and having to go every 5 minutes. It was very complicated. And a woman I didn't know who taught at the school knocked on my car window. I rolled it down, and she handed me a piece of paper. She said, call this woman. She'll teach you to knit. So through this just wonderful network of women that were in my life at that time, they found someone who knew someone that would teach me to knit. And it was a young woman who had just graduated from college and didn't have a job, and so was working very unhappily at her mother's knitting store. And I called her. She said, yep, come in. And she almost killed me that day. Other days to follow because I'm bad at this stuff. But I realized very quickly that there was something about knitting. I think it's the combination of having to concentrate, especially if you're someone like me, things like this don't come easily. Having to concentrate, it brought my focus back, my ability to focus back. It really worked on the type A part of my personality because there was a product at the end, like I was doing something.
A result, yeah.
A result, yeah. And when I knit, time passes like in a fog, and I still knit every day. It became the thing that I always say, I knit my way through grief. And I went to LA last week for a book event, and I got on that airplane and reached for my knitting and realized I had forgotten it. And by the time I got home, I was having like withdrawal.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. It's so calming and meditative.
Yeah.
People often say, oh, is it like yoga? But it's nothing like that. It's more akin to gardening or swimming, things where you repeat an action.
You're listening to the What About Grief podcast. We will get back to the conversation in a moment, but I wanted to remind you that you can write to us at the show with your thoughts, ideas, or a description of your own grief journey. We appreciate hearing from you, and we like being connected with our listeners. So please reach out to us via email at whataboutgriefpod@gmail.com. Also, if you like the podcast and find it helpful, please go to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star rating, hit the subscribe button, and leave a review. All of this helps us grow the podcast and helps new listeners find the show. And share the link with those you know who are experiencing their own grief. The goal of the podcast is to help those like us navigate the confusing emotion that is grief. You said when you joined a knitting group that, and I really like this, you said you were just another person who loves to knit, not the woman whose daughter died. I am anonymous. And I love how you describe that, because like the focus is on you, Anne, and not the title of Anne who lost her daughter, Grace. You know, we all get these titles after we lose someone. Like, I'm Larry, my wife, Sarah passed away.
Yeah, right.
And you were just part of a group that, to your point, you guys would just knit, and maybe you talked, maybe you didn't, but no one kind of knew your story, which was probably very good for the soul.
Oh, yes, so good for the soul. Because in my neighborhood or my town or at my kid's school, that, as you said, that was my title.
Yeah.
And I didn't want that title. I didn't want to be grocery shopping and looking up and seeing someone with like complete pity on their face.
Right. Yeah.
Coming toward me, because it would upset me, And so I would go there, and honestly, even the woman who taught me to knit did not know for a very long time.
That's pretty neat, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She just knew I was a bad knitter.
A lot of Band-Aids on your fingers.
Totally.
Oh, my gosh.
So my title there was Anne the Bad Knitter.
That's great.
It's funny, too, because it just reminded me of Larry describing kind of in those early days when you would go to the grief group.
Mm-hmm.
And how, I mean, you tell the story, but it made you feel more comfortable to be around other people that were kind of the same.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I could open up more to people who had lost somebody and relate to them, because they knew my state of mind.
Exactly. You didn't have to explain a lot.
Yeah, you connect with them.
Had totally, I remember calling this grief group called Compassionate Friends, which is for families that have lost children. And when I called to find out where there was one near me, I said, I need one in which the people have lost children around 5 years old. And they said, oh, it doesn't work that way. It's like everybody goes.
Yeah.
And I was mad. I was like, no, I need people who will understand this. But of course, it was just understanding grief.
I read recently, Anne, on your Substack, something that I can completely relate to, and what I mentioned earlier about the grief ambush. And I was wondering if you could read your little story about the Santa Barbara trip.
Sure. I was feeling pretty proud of myself. I woke up at 6 a.m., left Santa Barbara at 7 a.m., returned my rental car, and got off the shuttle at Terminal 5 at 10 o'clock for my 12:25 flight. I mean, I was actually grinning. Then out of nowhere, a little girl came skipping toward me. She had on a sparkly tutu and shoes that lit up as she walked. And friends, I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Images of my Gracie in her sparkles and glitter seared through me, and I had to sit down and catch my breath. Grace loved to wear pink with orange, stripes with different stripes, anything shiny. Here I was, happy, and in a split second, grief walloped me, knocked me flat. It has been 23 years, and still it can knock me down.
It so beautifully describes what we go through. And I was just wondering, how do you, for people who haven't really experienced grief, can you explain these grief ambushes?
I have to tell you, Larry, I love that phrase. It's so perfect. It is an ambush.
Yeah.
It's very hard to put into words, but think of when you're, kind of quiet and a loud noise comes, or someone says something and you jump, it sort of comes out of nowhere, and your heart pounds and it takes you a while to settle down. Magnify that times like 1,000. It's like you're just living your life. I mean, that morning that I just read about, I had been obsessing all the night before because I had to get to LAX from Santa Barbara. And it's that, you all know, it's that tangle of traffic that you could never predict. And I really wanted to be back home. And everything went so smoothly. There was some traffic, but nothing unexpected. And then returning a rental car can be a nightmare. And that went smoothly. And the shuttle was right there. And I was just like, so just imagine yourself having that great day. And then, just something comes and, knocks you down.
Right.
unexpected. I mean, I was just living my life, kind of walking with a spring in my step, like, I'm going to be able to even get a bite to eat. I made it here in plenty of time for my flight.
Yeah.
And then just that little girl coming toward me and took my breath away.
I mean, it's been a little over, like I said earlier, 4 years for me since Sarah passed. And I see couples together at a restaurant laughing and talking, or I'll see people in a car talking and going somewhere, or, taking a walk hand in hand. And I'm like, ooh, I'm a party of one right now in my life. And that's when, the ambushes come into me.
Oh, for sure. I can only imagine.
I mean, how do you cope in the aftermath? Because does it make you more wary? Are you, because you were having this great day, it's like, what is it? Do you have any sort of methods or things that, to figure a way through it? Or how do you, I guess you took a moment and you sat down, right?
That's right. And that's what I have found. I mean, this is all these years later. In the beginning and for the first few years, my impulse was always to flee. I ran out of grocery stores. I, left my car. When something would come, I would just have to go. I just have to remove myself totally.
Physically, you needed to move somewhere.
Yeah, I needed to be away from whatever that thing was that had set me off. And even though sometimes you don't know what the thing is, more often you do. Like you just described it so beautifully. You see a couple holding hands, you know. And now what I find is I have to sit with it. And maybe that I should have done that earlier, but it took me some time to figure it out. That just sit down, take a deep breath, let your feelings wash over you,
Yeah.
and then steady yourself. I mean, it's better to feel them
than to hide them away.
Yeah. I think so.
I think hiding it makes it worse.
Makes it worse.
You're not being true to yourself,
And you can't really do it.
No.
Right?
Yeah. In your book, you explain the decision you and your husband made about adopting a 9-month-old baby girl from China after trying to have a baby on your own. And you spoke about the idea of a subsequent child, not a replacement child. And can you tell us about that decision and then how Annabelle came into your life?
Yeah, I have this really crystal clear memory of driving, and my son was in the back seat, and he loved Transformers. I don't know if you know those.
Oh, yeah.
And he was, he had one of these really complicated ones, and he was manipulating it, And I looked in the rearview mirror, and just tears were coming down. He was just crying silently with this Transformer in his lap. And I thought, I have got to fix this. Like, I have got to do something. I'm not saying we did that for Sam.
Right.
But I thought, he's sitting back there alone, and he always had a sidekick. And I didn't immediately land on, so I should, we should have a baby. But I thought about it a lot. And I thought, part of this grief I'm feeling is that I still have maternal love to spare, like so much. And we knew people who had adopted babies from China, and those kids were great. And the adoption process at the time, it's since shut down, but at the time it moved pretty quickly. And I was in grief therapy, and a lot of those same well-meaning people had said, you're not going to replace Grace, and you're trying to replace her. But I don't know why, but I knew that I was not doing that.
Right.
That whoever this new person was going to be all herself. And I also knew Grace is irreplaceable, so why try?
Right.
But I wanted more kids. And so we even requested twins or siblings. We'll take 2. I just felt that my heart was big enough to do that. And it was my therapist who said, well, the next person who says, you're trying to replace Grace, tell them that there's something called a subsequent child. And it's having a child after any loss. After you've had children and you have any kind of loss and you have another child, And so it's an actual term. But of course, once they placed Annabelle in my arms, she was just Annabelle. I didn't need any of the adjectives,
Yeah. It's an amazing story, and I hope listeners will read the book and especially that part. But I think the most amazing thing was the date the orphanage gave to Annabelle for her birthday is April 18th, which is the same day that Grace passed away. And that just blew my mind. I don't know how else to say it.
Oh, I know, Larry. I have to tell you. So, they don't know when these babies were born because they were abandoned. And when they arrive at the orphanage, they give them a name and a birthday. They look at how a doctor looks at how old they are, and they kind of just go back, 6 weeks or 2 months or whatever. So we get the call that we have a baby, and they tell us. I remember the first thing they said was, "She's cute and she's healthy and she's 9 months old and her birthday's April 18th." I could not even speak.
Yeah.
And I went to China with liquid, whiteout. I was going to change the birth certificate. But once I got there, I don't know, China doesn't mess around. There's a lot of people with guns, and they take you in private rooms a lot. And I was like, I don't think I'll do this.
Yeah.
But it was a challenge. But then I remember on one of her birthdays, because I remember saying, I don't know what I'm going to do, having to celebrate that because I will never bake cupcakes on that day, ever.
Sure.
And I remember it was one of her birthdays, and all the kids were out in our backyard, and I had a tray of pink cupcakes I had just baked. And I opened the door to step out with them, and I just thought, somehow that having that day as something to celebrate was actually very good.
Yeah.
And an interesting way to connect my two daughters.
Yeah. I love what you wrote in talking about Annabelle. You said, one afternoon, as I strapped Annabelle into her car seat, a feeling of overwhelming grief filled me. I missed Grace, just like I do every day. Even as tears sprang to my eyes, I was smiling, happy at the sight of Annabelle grinning up at me, showing off her 2 new teeth. The feelings of grief and joy live side by side now in my heart. I did not know that they, such opposites, could exist. And so many people write about, talk about, ask me about grief and joy.
Yeah.
Can they live side by side like you wrote?
Absolutely.
And they can in some ways, right?
I remember, and what you just read, what I was describing there was kind of a revelation, like an acknowledgement, an understanding of that. But when I look back, even before that, there were times like, I remember going to see the movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, and laughing and being shocked that I was finding something funny. And that's just another example of those two feelings, cohabitating.
Yeah.
Or, the pride. My son has been doing theater since he was a little kid, and I would go to his plays, and even though I was obviously missing Grace because she was like his biggest fan, just seeing him up there shining, well, there's that grief and joy again, So many examples.
So when you look at your grief journey now, some 20 years on, what do you reflect on?
It has become so much part of the fabric of me that rather than reflect on it, I think I inhabit it, if that makes sense. I mean, I reflect on it when people ask me, such good, thoughtful questions like you are doing, Larry and Marcia. But now it's just part of who I am. And I accept I have a wonderful husband who accepts like those times. And, they're not obviously as frequent as they were for a long time, when I just start to cry, or I just am sad, or I can't get out of bed. I still have all those days, and it's those things still happen. Or part of the result for me is that I can catastrophize very easily because this horrible thing happened that I'd never heard could happen, and it happened all of a sudden. And so I can really go off a cliff with worry over something that I mean, I'll hyperventilate. I couldn't reach my daughter the other day. And I freaked out. And so it's important that I know that is part of who I am now.
And just a couple quick questions. Recently seeing the shooting in Minneapolis of those poor kids, and I was wondering what you would tell someone who's lost a child about the grief journey and then how they might re-enter the world with the weight of grief of losing a child.
I say this in Comfort, in my book Comfort, but I think that rather than words, there's nothing that can replace a good, strong hug. One that really lets someone know you're not alone in this. When people, I've spoken at so many grief groups, especially when Comfort and my novel, The Knitting Circle, came out. I think I was on a book tour for like 2.5 years, seriously, with those books. And everybody would come up and tell me their grief story. And I only listened and held a hand, held their hand and hugged them, because I can't tell them that it's going to go away. And I can't fix anything. But I think I'll give you a good example. I was speaking at a grief group in Portland, Maine, for families who lost children specifically. And I had been on this book tour, as I said, for a long time. And it was really taking a lot out of me to every day or every night be talking about grief and listening to grief stories. I mean, it was really wearing on me. And I thought, I can't go. I can't do it again. And there's going to be like 100 people. And, I'm going to be there all night. And I can't take more on. That's what I was feeling. And then I thought, but you must. You wrote this book and people want to talk to you. And so I remember getting dressed. I was walking out the door and I thought, I didn't put on any makeup. So I just grabbed lipstick and put it on. And after the talk, this man came up to me and he said that, thank you for the talk and for the book. He said, you have given me hope that someday I will be okay. And I said, I'm so glad. He said, no, it's because you have on lipstick. He said, the fact that you can get dressed and put on lipstick and walk into the world means that someday I will be able to do that too.
Yeah.
So I think rather than telling people, it's just being there and showing up.
I like that. I agree with that too. So many people have shown up for me.
Gosh. Yeah. And now I know to do that for others, to write that card, to remember 3 months or 6 months later that they're still grieving and check in on them.
Yeah. And when do you feel Grace's presence in your life?
Almost every day, seriously. Yeah. I mean, I wish I had these experiences that people describe, that like a particular butterfly comes or when they see a red bird or
right.
I don't have that. Like, I feel her absence in things like that. She hasn't sent me signs I take that back actually. Like many people after she died, we went to a psychic. I went to a psychic and that psychic said, she's sending you dimes. And I said, okay, great. She's giving me money. Perfect. After that psychic said that, it continues. But for about a month, I was getting dimes in the strangest ways. For example, I bought coffee with like a $5 bill or a $10 bill. And the woman said, I'm so embarrassed. I have to give you your change all in dimes.
Oh,
and she handed me 40 dimes, 50 dimes.
Oh my gosh.
I was on a flight on Lufthansa. And I went into the bathroom and there was a dime on the floor.
Oh my gosh.
I wasn't even in America.
Right.
Friends were calling me and saying, I got to tell you, I found 5 dimes in my washing machine, or I found 5 dimes under my bed, or we started keeping them. So that, I think, I've heard that, that metal is a way that they communicate. So, maybe that is a sign. You hang on to what you can.
Right.
But I feel her more at my attitude, the way I look at the world. She really changed and affected me in a delightful way. So every day I think of that.
All right, last question. How hard is it to learn knitting? Should I give it a try? I feel like I need to after interviewing
Okay, Larry, if I can do it, anybody can. That's all I can tell you, because I am not good at this stuff. And
pair of socks or something?
No, those are super hard. No, you want to...
Oh, okay.
Yes, that's more like it. Well, you're in Chicago, and there's wonderful knitting stores all around. You're in a great place for knitting stores. And you just plop yourself down, and you're going to have a lot of happy people helping you knit.
Okay. All right. I'll let you know.
Yes, please let me know how it goes.
I will. Well, Anne's memoir is called Comfort, A Journey Through Grief. And it's, people have given me a lot of grief books, and I've read a lot, and some have hit home in some ways. But I would say this one really, really touched me. And I felt like you were writing my grief journey in some ways. So, I really recommend it to anyone who's listening who is dealing with grief, and all your books, obviously a wide variety, not just on grief, but thank you for what you are doing in this grief community.
Thank you so much. And thank you for such a lovely conversation.
Thanks, Anne.
Marcia's going to head down to France again and see you down there at the writing conference.
I'm not going to be there this time.
I wish.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
As Anne and I spoke about grief and joy coexisting, I came across this short poem recently and found it very moving. So I wanted to share the words that felt very comforting to me. And it goes like this. So, let the tears fall when they come. Let the laughter rise when memories bring warmth. Let grief and joy coexist, for they are not opposites. They are just love in different form. Remember, if you are experiencing grief, you are not alone. My thanks to Anne Hood. What About Grief is available monthly on all major podcast listening platforms. Please follow the podcast as well as rate and review the show on Apple Podcast. The executive producer of What About Grief is Marcia Anderson. Logo artwork was designed by TED Studios. This episode was recorded at BAM Studios in Chicago. And lastly, feel free to email us at whataboutgriefpod@gmail.com.